He didn't expect to hear anything, not in that house, not from her. But the sound stopped him in his tracks, soft, light, almost impossible. Laughter, coming from the kitchen. His pulse quickened, not with joy, but with confusion. He stepped forward, slowly, each footfall echoing down the cold marble hallway, the scent of soap and lemon in the air. And then he saw it, and for a moment he couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even make sense of what was happening, because what he was looking at made no sense at all. Charles Graham built his fortune in silence, the kind of silence that lives in boardrooms, that follows you home in sleek black cars, that looks like peace from the outside, but feels like failure behind closed doors. He lived at the top of Manhattan in a penthouse polished like a showroom, private chef, round-the-clock staff, everything under control except the only thing that mattered. Lucy, his daughter, 6 years old, nonverbal, autistic, and until that day, untouched by joy. She didn't speak, didn't look you in the eye, didn't laugh, at least not since her mother left. Charles had tried everything. Specialists from every corner of the country, devices, programs, even a therapy horse flown in from Vermont. Nothing worked. Nothing changed. Lucy stayed in her world, and Charles stayed in his. He kept his meetings. He missed her birthdays. He avoided the silence by filling it with work. Until that morning, a rainy Wednesday, he'd forgotten his laptop, came home mid-morning, didn't even tell the staff he was coming. And now he stood frozen in the doorway, staring at something he didn't know how to process. Lucy, perched on someone's shoulders, a young woman at the sink, humming while scrubbing a pot. And Lucy, laughing, freely, joyfully, her little hands flapping, eyes bright, body alive. Charles couldn't remember the last time he saw her like that. Maybe he never had, but instead of joy, what rose in him was fear, then anger, then something far worse. He opened his mouth and destroyed it all. Before we go deeper, click subscribe, tap like, and tell us where in the world you're watching from. This story is about the kind of love that doesn't always look like love at first, but finds a way when we least expect it. What happened in that kitchen wasn't the beginning of a breakdown, it was the beginning of a reckoning. And for Charles Graham, the man who had everything, it was the first time he realized what he was truly missing. He wasn't always this cold. Once Charles Graham was the kind of man who believed in legacy, in building something that mattered, not just for profit, but for family, for a future. But the day Lucy stopped speaking, something inside him stopped too. He tried to keep going, tried to be the man the world still believed he was. 40 years old, head of a tech empire that went from garage code to global IPO in 6 years. Investors called him a genius. Magazines called him a miracle. But at home, there was no press, no applause, just the quiet click of his dress shoes on hardwood floors and a daughter who couldn't say his name. Lucy had been diagnosed at 4, autism, non-verbal, sensory sensitive. Charles remembered sitting in that white office, blinking through medical terms like a man who spoke only numbers. His wife never made it to the follow-up. She packed a suitcase that fall and left a single note by the door. I can't do this. Neither could he if he was being honest. But Charles didn't leave. He stayed. Just not all the way. He handed Lucy's care to professionals, rotated through therapists like apps on his phone, hired a full-time nanny, part-time behavioral coach, private chef, and an estate manager who oversaw it all. Every corner of the penthouse was curated for ease, child-safe, ultra-modern and completely sterile, a place that looked perfect and felt like nothing. Lucy lived mostly in the East Wing. Her room, the sensory space, and the quiet kitchen where she'd often sit for hours, tapping blocks or tracing the window glass with her fingers. Charles told himself she was okay. That silence was just her version of peace. But in truth, he stopped going in there. He left before she woke, returned after she was asleep, and when he did try to connect, kneeling beside her, reaching for her hand, she'd pull away like he was a stranger. Sometimes she'd hum, just a low, fragile tone, like she was trying to find something only she could hear. It haunted him more than any silence ever could. Still, he kept moving. Because movement, at least, felt like control. He worked late, traveled often, told himself it was all for her, for Lucy's future. But the truth was quieter and heavier. He was afraid, not of her diagnosis, but of what it revealed in him, the helplessness, the failures he couldn't outrun, no matter how many millions he made. And then came that morning, the one he hadn't planned, a cancelled meeting, a forgotten laptop, the rain falling hard on the city, smearing the skyline like watercolor. He'd stepped into his home expecting silence. Instead, he heard something he hadn't heard in years. Joy. Not music. Not a therapist's song. Not a toy making noise. Laughter. Real. Messy. Alive. And for a moment, he didn't recognize it, until he followed it. Down the hallway, into the kitchen, and saw his daughter, Lucy, lifted high on the shoulders of a woman he barely remembered hiring. The new housekeeper, Grace. She was humming, bare feet on the tile, soap bubbles floating around them like tiny stars. Lucy's face was wide open, bright, wild with wonder, clapping her hands as if the world had just let her in for the first time. It should have been a miracle. But to Charles, it felt like chaos. She could fall. She could be overstimulated. She could shut down. His fear took over before his heart could catch up, and with one sentence, he tore it all apart. He didn't know it then. But that single reaction would cost him more than he ever imagined, and what would follow wasn't discipline. It was loss. Real, soul-deep, irreversible loss. He raised his voice before he could lower his fear. What the hell is going on in here? It wasn't just loud. It was sharp, like glass cutting through a moment that had no defenses. Grace froze. The sponge slipped from her hand and hit the sink with a splash. Lucy stopped laughing. Her arms dropped to her sides. Her body stiffened. The smile vanished from her face like it had never been there at all. Charles stepped forward, furious, not because she'd done something wrong, but because he didn't know what she'd done at all. His daughter was on a stranger's shoulders, a child who flinched at touch, now wrapped around this woman like she was part of her. It didn't make sense. It didn't feel safe, it didn't feel controlled. And for Charles Graham, control was survival. "Get her down, now," he snapped. Grace bent her knees slowly, lowering Lucy to the floor with careful hands. No sudden movement, no panic. But Lucy was already shrinking, her body curling inward, her fingers twitching at her sides. The look on her face wasn't confusion, it was fear. "She was safe," Grace said softly. "She asked to see the bubbles. I thought—" "You thought," he cut in, jaw tight. "You don't get paid to think." Grace stood up straight. She didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. "I just wanted her to smile," she said. And she did. But he wasn't listening. He couldn't. He was already too far gone. "You're not her therapist, you're not her parent, you're a maid. A maid. Stay in your lane." He didn't mean to say it that way, but it came out with all the weight of everything he hadn't said in months. Grace looked at him. No tears, no defense, just a kind of quiet disbelief, like she'd seen this before, from other people, in other rooms. "Sir," she said gently, "I would never put her in danger." But Charles wasn't in the room anymore. He was in his own head, spiraling, seeing headlines, liability, lawsuits. What if she had fallen? What if she'd gotten hurt? "You're fired," he said flatly. "Sir, please, no discussion. I want you out by the hour. Marta will sort your things." Grace blinked like she hadn't heard him, but she had. Lucy let out a small sound, not quite a cry, but something close. A strained whimper, the kind she used when she was overwhelmed and couldn't process it fast enough. Grace knelt beside her. "Shh, it's okay," she whispered. "I'm right here, sweetheart, I'm not—" Charles stepped forward. "Don't touch her." Grace looked up. "She needs—" "I said, don't touch her." Her hands slowly lifted away. Lucy turned toward her, arms stretched out, needing the comfort that had just been ripped away. But Grace didn't move. She stood, nodded once, and walked out, leaving behind the sponge, the gloves, the bubbles still floating in the sink. Lucy crawled to the kitchen door, sat down, and stayed there. Charles tried to pick her up. She wriggled free. When he reached for her again, she slapped his hand and let out a shrill, broken sound he hadn't heard since she was 2. He stood still, staring at the door Grace had walked through, at the child sitting on the floor like she'd been dropped. And in that moment, he felt it. Not guilt. Not yet. Just something heavier, like the weight of a moment he wouldn't be able to take back. The house went quiet again after that, but not the same kind of quiet. This one felt heavier, like something sacred had been torn out of the air and no one knew how to name it. Lucy stayed by the kitchen door that night. She didn't eat, didn't move, just sat cross-legged on the tile, holding the wooden spoon Grace had once handed her during their first breakfast together. Marta tried coaxing her, softly, gently, offering snacks, toys, even Lucy's favorite blanket. But the girl didn't flinch. She stared at the space where Grace had stood, as if time could rewind if she just waited long enough. By morning, her blankets were gone from the bed and folded into a pile beside the pantry door. She wouldn't go back to her room, wouldn't speak, wouldn't sleep, wouldn't play, just sat. And by the second night, she began humming. But not her usual low hum. This one had a tune, a melody Grace used to sing while folding laundry. Marta stood behind the doorframe, clutching a dish towel, tears in her eyes. Charles didn't notice at first. He was already diving back into damage control, emailing HR to list a new housekeeper position, calling Lucy's therapist to reassess her schedule. He brought home a new sensory toy, left it on the table beside her. She didn't touch it. He tried kneeling again, held out his hand. But this time Lucy wouldn't even look at him. When he reached for her cheek, she turned away. She had never done that before. And suddenly, the silence wasn't peaceful. It was punishment. By the 3rd day, she stopped eating more than a few bites. Marta called the pediatrician, who said regression was common during emotional disruption, especially in children like Lucy. Just keep the routine consistent, they said. But nothing was consistent anymore. Not without Grace. And Charles was beginning to feel it. The sense that something had slipped through his fingers, something fragile and irreplaceable. He stood at the doorway that night, watching Lucy curl into herself on the floor, rocking gently, clutching that spoon like it meant something he couldn't understand. He didn't move, didn't speak, because deep down, he knew. He wasn't who she was waiting for. Marta entered quietly behind him. "Sir," she said, voice low, "I need to say something, and I know it's not my place, but I've been here too long not to speak." Charles didn't turn around. "She's getting worse," Marta continued. "You see it, I see it, and I know you don't want to hear this, but I have to tell you anyway." He looked at her, exhausted, angry, desperate for someone to blame. "You made a mistake," she said softly. Charles's jaw clenched. She was being careless. What if Lucy had fallen? She didn't. "That's not the point." "She laughed, sir," Marta interrupted gently but firmly. "For the first time in her life. I've been here since Lucy was born. I've never seen her smile like that." Charles exhaled through his nose, trying to keep control of the conversation, but Marta wasn't finished. "She wasn't just smiling," she said. "She was alive, and you took that away." Charles stepped back, shaking his head. "She's just adjusting. She'll be fine." "No, sir, she won't." Her next words dropped like stone. "She said something." Charles blinked. "What?" Marta nodded, eyes glassy. She looked at Grace and said a word. He stared at her, not breathing. She said, "Mommy." Clear as day. Time stopped. Charles looked back toward the kitchen. Lucy was still there, still rocking, still waiting. And suddenly, he couldn't feel his hands. He wanted to ask Marta to repeat it, wanted to deny it, wanted to believe she'd misheard, imagined it, wanted it too badly. But he knew Marta. She didn't lie. And the weight of that one word, "Mommy," broke something open inside him. Something that had been locked tight for far too long. He had fired the only person who'd ever reached her. Now she was gone. And Lucy was slipping away with her. He didn't sleep that night. Not after what Marta said. Not after hearing that one word echo again and again in his head. Mommy. He watched Lucy through the hallway window, curled up on the kitchen floor beneath the pantry light, her small body still rocking gently, her eyes wide and blank. And suddenly all the things he thought were final weren't. The firing, the rules, the decisions he made to stay in control. He'd been wrong. So completely, painfully wrong. And now he had to fix it. But Grace was gone. By morning, Charles had called the agency 3 times. No answer. The 4th time, a woman picked up. Polite, rehearsed, distant. "Grace Abraham," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "She worked here until 4 days ago. I need to speak with her." "I'm sorry, sir, there's no forwarding contact. No number. She didn't leave one." "What about an address?" "All we have is a P.O. box and a temporary Queen's shelter listed on her intake file. No residential information." Charles hung up without saying goodbye. Then he stood in the middle of the kitchen, staring at Lucy's untouched cereal bowl. He was a billionaire. He could buy land, move markets, track down CEOs across continents, but he couldn't find a single woman who had changed his daughter's life in less than 2 weeks. By noon, he'd called every shelter in Queens. Some were helpful. Most weren't. No one recognized the name. No one could place her face. A few volunteers promised to check the intake logs and call him back. No one did. Lucy didn't move from her spot, not even when Marta tried to carry her to bed. She cried for the first time that evening, not loudly, just a soft, hollow sobbing, like her body had forgotten how to weep properly. That night, Charles sat beside her and whispered, "I'm sorry." She didn't react. He whispered it again. Still nothing. The next morning, he hired a private investigator. He didn't ask about cost, didn't ask how long it would take. He just said the name, showed the resume from the agency file, and gave the only lead he had, the shelter. The man didn't blink, just said, "I'll find her." And then Charles waited. Each day blurred into the next. Lucy stayed curled by the door, now with her back to the world. She stopped humming, stopped crying. She simply withdrew. He tried talking. He tried toys. He tried being present. But he had shown up too late. Whatever Grace had unlocked in those short, impossible days was slipping away. And it was all his fault. On the 6th day, the investigator called. "She's not at the shelter anymore," he said. "Hasn't been for weeks, but someone remembered her. Said she used to come by with her little brother. Gave us a new lead." Charles didn't ask what it was. He was already grabbing his coat. It was raining again, the same way it had that morning in the kitchen. He arrived at a worn-down building in Queens, the kind with rusted gates and cracked steps. No elevator, 5 flights of stairs. By the 4th, he was winded. By the 5th, he was shaking. He raised his hand, knocked twice. The door creaked open. A girl, maybe 8, maybe younger, peeked out with cautious eyes. "Who are you?" I'm looking for Grace." The girl called over her shoulder. "Jew! There's a man at the door." A pause. Then footsteps. Grace appeared, towel over one shoulder, her face unreadable. The moment she saw him, something in her jaw tightened. Her arms folded across her chest. "What do you want?" Charles opened his mouth, but for once the words didn't come easily. He wasn't here as a CEO, not as a man with money, not with power, just a father who had run out of chances. "I need to talk to you," he said quietly. Grace didn't answer. She just waited, and in the silence between them stood everything he'd broken. Now he would have to face it, all of it. Grace didn't move from the doorway. She stood there, arms crossed, blocking the threshold with the quiet strength of someone who's learned the hard way what not to let back in. Charles felt the heat rise behind his collar, not from arrogance, not from anger, from shame, the kind that doesn't flinch, the kind that lingers. "I shouldn't have come unannounced," he said. Grace raised an eyebrow. "But you did." Her voice wasn't cold, just tired, like someone who'd already rehearsed this conversation and expected it wouldn't matter. Behind her, a kettle whistled on the stove. On the couch, a boy sat cross-legged, scribbling math problems in a workbook. Her world, small, cluttered, alive. He took a breath. "Lucy isn't okay." Grace didn't react. "She hasn't spoken. She's barely eating. She won't sleep unless she's by the kitchen door." Grace blinked, slow and unreadable. "You fired me." "I know. In front of your staff. Like I was nothing. I was wrong. You were cruel." He swallowed hard. "I was scared," he said. "I saw something I didn't understand, and instead of asking questions, I reacted. I thought I was protecting her." Grace leaned against the frame. "From what? Joy?" That landed. He looked down at his hands, like maybe they could explain what words couldn't. "I've never seen her like that before," he said. "Not once." Grace didn't speak, didn't nod, just watched. "She called you something," Charles said quietly. Now she looked at him. He met her eyes. "Marta told me. She called you Mommy." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of things unsaid, full of the weight of that word, spoken for the first time by a little girl who had never spoken at all. Grace's eyes welled, but she blinked them dry. "I didn't teach her that," she said. "She chose it." "I know." Charles stepped back slightly, gave her space to breathe, to decide. "I'm not here to ask you to come back the way things were," he said, "because they can't be and they shouldn't be." He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a plain white envelope and offered it to her. Grace didn't take it. "It's not money," he added. "It's a proposal, something different, on your terms, if you're willing to hear it." Still, she didn't move. He let the envelope fall onto the table just inside the door. "She needs you," he said finally. Then softer, "I need you too. Not as help, not as staff, as someone Lucy chose, as someone I failed to see." Grace looked at him for a long time. Not angry, not forgiving, just measuring, trying to decide if this man was the same one who'd thrown her out like she didn't matter, or someone new. And Charles stood in that doorway, waiting, not as a billionaire, not as a father with regrets, but as a man trying to earn back the trust he shattered. Grace finally stepped back from the door, just enough to let him see inside, not enough to invite him in. Not yet. The door didn't close, but it didn't open all the way either. What came next would be her decision, and this time he wouldn't try to control it. She let him sit at the small table by the window, not because she trusted him, but because Lucy did. The envelope stayed untouched between them, still sealed, still quiet, neither of them reaching for it. Grace poured tea for herself, didn't ask if he wanted any. Her brother glanced over from the couch, wary, but Grace gave a small nod, and he returned to his homework. Charles had never felt more out of place, which, somehow, felt right. This wasn't his home, not his terms, and for once, he didn't try to fix that. "I don't want to go back to what it was," Grace said finally. Her voice was calm, direct, not angry, but not soft either. "I don't want to be your maid, I never was. That's just the title someone put on the payroll." Charles nodded. "I understand." "No," she said. "You don't, but you will." He didn't interrupt. Grace took a slow sip of tea, then set the cup down. "I'll come back," she said, "but only under my conditions." Charles looked up. She didn't flinch. "First," she said, "I come back as Lucy's developmental caregiver. That means I decide how we work with her. I won't be cleaning baseboards or folding your suits." "Agreed," he said without hesitation. "Second, I finish my degree. Early childhood development. I was halfway through when I had to drop out. I'll cover it. Tuition, materials, everything. Third, she continued, my little brother gets transferred to a proper school, somewhere safe, somewhere that sees him for who he is, not who they assume he'll become. Charles glanced toward the boy on the couch. Quiet, focused, determined not to look back. Done, he said. He'll have options. And last, Grace leaned forward, not to intimidate but to be clear. I want respect, Charles. Not sir, not Mr. Graham. Charles. No yelling, no talking down to me, no treating me like I'm disposable when you get uncomfortable. Her voice didn't shake. She meant every word. I'm not coming back to be erased. He didn't speak for a moment. Then he nodded. Not just agreed, he said softly. Promised. Grace watched him. Really watched him. Not searching for weakness, just for truth. Then finally she leaned back. That envelope? She said. Open it when you get home. He nodded again. But he didn't reach for it. He didn't ask for a hug, didn't ask for a decision that day. He just stood quietly, and before leaving he turned toward her one last time. I was wrong about you, he said. Grace didn't smile. You weren't just wrong about me, she replied. You were wrong about your daughter. That one stung, because it was true and he knew it. He left with the envelope tucked under his arm, and 100 things heavier in his chest, and at home, waiting by the door, was a little girl still holding on to silence, and still hoping Grace would walk back through it. Grace returned on a Thursday. There was no grand arrival, no dramatic music or teary reunion, just the soft click of the front door, the quiet rustle of a bag placed gently on the floor. Lucy was sitting by the kitchen wall, exactly where she'd been for over a week. Head down, spoon clutched in her fist, eyes hollow, and then a scent, lavender and soap, a humming sound, low, familiar. Grace didn't announce herself. She simply walked past the doorway and started washing dishes, just like before. No ceremony, no instructions, just presence. At first, Lucy didn't move, didn't look. But a minute later, there was a shift, a tilt of her head, a twitch of her fingers. Then she stood, slowly, carefully, as if afraid she might wake from something that wasn't a dream. She crossed the floor with quiet steps and reached for Grace's apron. Grace didn't turn. She just kept humming. Then Lucy pressed her forehead gently against Grace's back and let out a sound. A single broken syllable that cracked the quiet like morning light. Mommy. Grace closed her eyes. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just kept washing. That night, Lucy slept in her own bed for the first time in 12 days. In the weeks that followed, everything began to shift. Not dramatically, not quickly, just one breath at a time. Lucy laughed again, quietly at first, like she wasn't sure if it was allowed, then louder, full, alive. She let Grace comb her hair, let Charles sit beside her without pulling away, started clapping to music, dancing in circles, grabbing Grace's hands and spinning until they both fell over laughing on the rug. And then the words came, not in full sentences, not even every day, but real. Bubbles. Juice. Mommy. Dog. Charles listened to each one like it was a verse from scripture. He started coming home early, not for meetings, not for show, just to watch them. Sometimes he stayed in the doorway, didn't say a word, just stood there, watching his daughter come back to life. One afternoon he heard Lucy whisper something from across the room. She was lying on her back, her head on Grace's lap. Her voice was faint, like a secret. Mommy loves me. Charles had to leave the room. He didn't want them to see him cry. He wasn't sure when it happened, but something in him had changed. The boardroom didn't feel as urgent. The company no longer filled the void, and the silence he once drowned in was now full of music. Grace hadn't just returned to care for Lucy. She had redefined what care looked like: firm, gentle, intentional. There were charts on the fridge now, routine cards on the wall, flashcards by the sink, labelled with tiny drawings and stickers. And Lucy? She pointed at them, said the words when she could, and smiled when she couldn't. The girl who once lived in shadows was beginning to reach for the light. But love, Charles was learning, wasn't a single moment of redemption. It was 100 quiet ones, strung together by someone who refused to walk away. It started with a simple request. Grace had asked for a team meeting. Nothing formal, just a check-in with the household staff. They gathered in the living room. Marta, the chef, the driver, 2 assistants, even the security chief. Everyone was seated, except Charles. He stood by the window, hands clasped tightly behind his back. The moment didn't ask for luxury. It asked for something far harder. Humility. Grace stood beside the fireplace, shoulders relaxed, expression calm. Not demanding, not performative, just present. Charles turned slowly, faced the room, cleared his throat once, and then he spoke. 2 weeks ago, I made a mistake, he said, not just as a father, but as a man. The room fell still. I reacted from fear, not understanding. I let my pride speak louder than compassion, and I disrespected someone who gave my daughter more than I ever have. He looked at Grace, not with shame, with reverence. You brought Lucy back to life, he said, his voice tight. Not with therapy, not with money, but with patience, with warmth, with presence. The silence in the room thickened. I treated you like staff, like help, like someone who could be replaced. A pause. You can't be. Grace didn't look away, didn't flinch. She let him say what needed to be said. I'm sorry, Charles said. Not because I feel guilty, but because I was blind. He took a slow breath, then did something no one expected. He lowered himself to one knee. Not out of drama, but truth. A billionaire in a $1,000 suit, kneeling before the woman he once fired without thought. I'm asking for forgiveness, not for what I did, because I can't undo it, but for what I'll do differently from here on out. Grace looked down at him. Her eyes didn't soften, but they did shine, with something quiet, something real. She nodded. Apology accepted, she said. Then gently, let's move forward, not pretend it never happened. The staff exhaled like they'd all been holding something in. Marta wiped her eyes. The chef gave a quiet nod. Even the driver shifted in his seat, because they weren't just witnessing an apology, they were watching a man transform. That evening, Charles sat at the edge of Lucy's bed. Grace was reading beside her, voice soft, rhythmic. Lucy curled between them, her head resting on Grace's arm, her fingers gently tracing the fabric of Charles's sleeve. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like an outsider in his own home. He felt part of something, not because he deserved it, but because he chose to show up for it. Forgiveness wasn't a finish line, it was a door. And now that it was open, all that mattered was what came next. 2 years later, Grace stood at a podium in a deep blue cap and gown. The tassel swayed as she looked down at the degree in her hands, Bachelor of Science in Early Childhood Development, magna cum laude. She didn't cry, but Charles did. He sat in the front row beside Lucy, who clapped wildly as Grace's name was called. Lucy didn't need prompts anymore. She knew when to clap, she knew who she was clapping for. Life had changed, slowly, then all at once. Charles stepped down from his company's board the year Grace went back to school. Not because he had to, because he finally understood what he didn't want to miss. He poured his energy and his guilt into something new. The Lucy Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to supporting underprivileged neurodiverse children and training caregivers in Grace's development model. No tech, no stock charts, just people helping people. The first center opened in the Bronx. By year's end, there were 3 more. Lucy still didn't talk much, but she didn't have to. She laughed. She danced. She reached for people when she wanted them near. And she used her words, not many, but enough. Enough to tell the world she was in it now. That spring, the foundation hosted its first gala. Donors, families, teachers, staff. And on stage, Under a warm halo of lights stood an 8-year-old girl in a navy dress with silver shoes. She held a mic in both hands. Her eyes searched the crowd until they landed on 2 people, one on her left, one on her right. She smiled. "I have 2 parents," she said, her voice soft but steady. "One made me—" She turned to Charles and squeezed his hand. "And one found me." She turned to Grace, who was already in tears. The room fell silent. And then came the applause, louder than music, fuller than speeches. Charles didn't say a word that night. He didn't need to. Sometimes love wasn't something you said. It was something you learned how to show. Later that week, they visited a small garden just outside the new Queen's Center. Charles pushed the gate open, while Grace walked with Lucy and her little brother Noah. The kids ran ahead, dirt under their nails, joy under their feet. Lucy paused at a small patch of soft soil. She crouched down, dug gently, and pulled a young rosebush from the canvas bag she'd carried. "Why a rose?" Grace asked softly. Lucy shrugged, then looked up at her, eyes steady, voice small but clear. "This one's for Mommy." Grace smiled, touched her chest. "For me?" Lucy nodded, then reached into the bag again and pulled out a second rose. "And this one's for second chances." Charles knelt beside her, gently helping guide her hands. The wind stirred through the leaves. Not loud, just enough to carry the sound of healing, enough to let something new take root. Not every story ends where it began. Some end in gardens, where silence becomes laughter, and love grows exactly where it was never supposed to.
He installed cameras in his own home to catch the nanny failing. What he saw at 2 in the morning, alone in the dark, watching weeks of footage he'd been avoiding, didn't just shock him. It destroyed him. Alexander Harris was 43 when his wife died, 11 days after giving birth to twin boys. Emily had been a pediatric neurologist in San Diego. 4 years of fertility battles, 2 miscarriages, everything they had poured into trying for a baby. When she finally made it to 37 weeks carrying Aaron and Adrian, they thought their prayers had been answered. Emergency C-section. Both boys born small but breathing. Emily held them against her chest one time, smiled at Alexander, whispered, "We did it." 4 days after coming home, she collapsed. Internal bleeding the hospital missed, dead before the ambulance arrived. The twins were 11 days old. Professional nurses quit after 2 weeks. "These babies need more than we can provide." Both boys cried constantly, especially Aaron. Something felt wrong, but Dr. Andrew Sullivan kept dismissing it. Normal for preemies. Then Emily's sister Diane showed up with lawyers. Emergency custody hearing. Claims Alexander was unfit. Evidence stacked against him. "Install cameras," Diane told him. "Prove you're monitoring everything." Desperate, Alexander hired Maureen James, 29, studying for her nursing license, gentle with the twins in ways that eased their crying. Diane hated her immediately. Too young, unqualified, dangerous. The doubts got inside Alexander's head. He installed the cameras. Weeks passed. His company faced a crisis, 18-hour days, no time to check footage, until one night at 2 a.m., alone, he finally opened the files. What he saw changed everything. Before we continue, hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and tell me where in the world you're watching from. Because this story is about the people carrying weight we never see, the ones God puts in our path when we're too broken to notice. And if you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever sacrificed everything for someone who didn't even know, this one's for you. You're seen. You matter. And maybe this story found you today because you needed to hear that. Alexander sat in his home office, the house silent except for the hum of his laptop. 2:17 a.m. He couldn't sleep. Hadn't been able to since the takeover fight ended. Victory should have felt good, but the penthouse was too quiet and Emily's absence too loud. He opened the security footage files, 3 weeks of recordings he'd never watched. Started at the beginning, expecting to see what Diane had warned him about. Maureen on her phone, the twins crying unattended, proof he could take to court. The first clip loaded. 8:43 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. Maureen was on the living room floor with both boys, but she wasn't just playing with them. Her hands moved with precision, lifting Aaron's left arm, rotating it at specific angles, stretching it gently while counting softly in another language. Her movements weren't casual. They were clinical, purposeful. Alexander leaned closer to the screen. She did this for 47 minutes straight. The same exercises over and over. Aaron would fuss and she'd pause, kiss his forehead, whisper something, then continue. This wasn't normal childcare. He clicked to the next clip. 11:15 a.m., same day. Kitchen. Maureen making bottles, and her face was wet. Silent tears streaming down her cheeks while she measured formula with shaking hands. She gripped the counter, shoulders trembling. Then she wiped her face, took a breath, and walked back to the living room wearing a smile the twins would never know was fake. Alexander's chest tightened. Another clip. 2:30 p.m. Maureen on the floor again with Aaron, moving his legs in patterns that looked medical. Hip rotations, ankle flexions, things Alexander had never seen. She pulled out a folded paper from her pocket, glanced at it, continued the exercises. Alexander paused, zoomed in on the paper. The heading read, Early Intervention Protocols for Infant. The rest was folded, but his hands went cold. He clicked forward. 4:20 p.m. Maureen preparing dinner, grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, something careful and homemade. She plated it, stared at it, then wrapped it up and put it away. Pulled out a granola bar instead, ate it, standing at the counter. She was using her food money for something else. Later footage showed her phone screen. Amazon orders, therapy equipment, positioning pillows, sensory cards, bought with her own money. Alexander scrolled faster. Every single day, the same pattern. Hours of therapy after he left for work. Her crying when she thought no one could see, equipment she hid before he came home. Then he found the bath time clip. Maureen lifting Aaron gently, examining his head with careful fingers. She found something, a mark, and her whole body went rigid. Her hand covered her mouth. She stared at it, then pulled out her phone and took photos from multiple angles. She heard Alexander's car, deleted the photos, composed her face, and was smiling when he walked in 30 seconds later. Alexander stopped the video. His son had a mark on his head Maureen had photographed and hidden. Dr. Sullivan had said everything was fine, but Maureen knew something she wasn't saying, and she'd been carrying it alone. Alexander couldn't stop watching. He clicked through more clips, his coffee going cold beside him, the night stretching into early morning without him noticing. There. Another one. 9:30 p.m. on a Wednesday. Maureen was supposed to be off at 8, but she was still there. On the floor between the cribs, Aaron in her arms, doing those same careful exercises, her voice soft, exhausted. Just 10 more minutes, sweet boy, then you can rest. She wasn't getting paid for this. Next clip, 11:45 p.m., same night. Both twins fussy and Maureen holding them simultaneously, one in each arm, swaying gently, singing something low and rhythmic, tears streaming down her face while she sang. Then she whispered something that made Alexander's breath catch. I'm so sorry I have to leave you soon, but someone has to make sure you get help. Even if it can't be me. Leave. Why would she be leaving? Alexander scrolled back through the timeline, found a clip from 2 weeks ago. Maureen in her small bedroom off the kitchen, a room he'd barely thought about, just knew she stayed there sometimes when the twins needed overnight care. She was sitting on the floor, holding a letter. Official government seal visible even on the grainy footage, her whole body shaking as she read it. Then she folded it carefully, hid it in a drawer, and sat there crying into her hands for 20 minutes. Alexander's stomach dropped. He fast-forwarded, found another clip. Maureen on her phone late at night, searching something. He zoomed in, could barely make out the screen. How to report medical malpractice anonymously. His heart started pounding. Another clip. Maureen during Aaron's checkup, the one Alexander had barely paid attention to, too busy on his phone dealing with work. He watched it now with the sound turned up. Maureen's voice, gentle but concerned. His left side seems stiff. He doesn't move his arm much. Both babies startle easily, but Aaron's reflexes seem really exaggerated. His head tilts right even during tummy time. I think it might be worth— Dr. Sullivan cut her off. I delivered these babies. I know their baseline. Premature nervous systems develop slower. What you're describing is textbook normal. But Alexander saw it now, the flash across Sullivan's face. Just for a second, something that looked like fear before the professional mask slammed back down. Maureen had pressed gently. But Aaron's asymmetry seems— I've been practicing medicine for 32 years, Sullivan said coldly. I think my medical degree carries more weight than a nanny's observations. Alexander had been right there in the room, hadn't heard any of it, too distracted, too buried in his own crisis to notice his son's doctor dismissing concerns that, watching now, seeing Aaron's stiff movements, the way his head tilted, were clearly real. He clicked to another clip. Maureen researching on her phone, article after article about infant cerebral palsy, birth trauma, forceps injuries, oxygen deprivation. She was teaching herself how to save his son, while he'd been installing cameras to catch her failing. Alexander's hands were shaking now. He searched through more footage, looking for— he didn't even know what— answers, understanding, some explanation for why this woman would sacrifice everything for children who weren't hers. Then he found the clip that broke him completely. The timestamp read 1:18 a.m. 4 nights ago. Maureen in her bedroom, door closed. Alexander almost skipped past it. What could happen in her private space that mattered? But something made him pause. She was on the floor, back against the bed, laptop open in front of her, typing something. Her face was wet, but she wasn't making a sound. Just tears running down while her fingers moved across the keyboard. Alexander leaned closer to the screen, adjusted the angle, could barely make out what she was writing. It was an email. To Massachusetts Medical Board. Subject: urgent, potential medical malpractice involving infant patient. His blood went cold. She kept typing. I am writing to report concerns regarding Dr. Andrew Sullivan and his treatment of twin infants Aaron and Adrian Harris, born via emergency C-section on— She listed the date, the hospital, every detail she'd memorized. Patient Aaron Harris shows clear signs of birth trauma. Left side hypertonia, exaggerated Moro reflex, persistent torticollis. Physical examination reveals a faint but visible mark on his scalp, consistent with forceps placement. When these symptoms were brought to Dr. Sullivan's attention at the 2-month checkup, he dismissed them as normal, despite their progressive nature. Alexander's hands gripped the edge of his desk. She continued typing. I believe Dr. Sullivan caused injury during delivery and is now covering up the damage by refusing proper evaluation and treatment. Without immediate intervention, this child will suffer permanent developmental delays. I'm submitting this report anonymously because I am undocumented and fear deportation, but I cannot in good conscience remain silent while a child's future is being sacrificed to protect a doctor's reputation. She sat back, reading what she'd written. Her shoulders shook. Then she highlighted the entire email and deleted it. Opened a new draft. Wrote the same thing again, word for word. Deleted it again. She did this 5 times. Finally, she saved a draft and closed the laptop. Pulled her knees to her chest, buried her face, and cried the way people cry when they're completely alone. Raw, broken, the kind of crying that comes from carrying something too heavy for too long. Alexander heard her whisper through the speakers. I'm sorry, Miguel. I'm so sorry I couldn't save you. But I can save them. Even if it costs me everything. Even if I lose everything again. She lifted her head, looked at the ceiling like she was talking to someone who wasn't there. God, I know you see this. I know you know what I'm trying to do. Please, please let them get help even after I'm gone. Please don't let Aaron suffer like Miguel did. I'm begging you. Alexander stopped the video. His whole body was shaking. Maureen had a brother who died, a brother with the same condition Aaron had, and she'd been too late to save him. But she wasn't going to be too late this time, even if it meant destroying herself. Alexander clicked to the next file, desperate now to understand. The timestamp was from yesterday morning, and what he saw made everything worse. Yesterday morning, 6:47 a.m. Maureen's key in the door, 30 minutes before she was supposed to arrive. Alexander watched her slip into the quiet penthouse, moving carefully so she wouldn't wake anyone. She went straight to the nursery, picked up Aaron first, so gently, like he was made of glass, kissed his forehead, examined his left arm, checked the range of motion, her face tight with concern. Then Adrian. Same careful attention, checking his neck rotation, his muscle tone. She carried both boys to the living room, laid out a soft mat, and started the therapy routine Alexander now recognized. But this time, he watched her face instead of just her hands. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, thinner than when she'd started 2 months ago, moving like every muscle hurt, but she didn't stop, didn't cut corners, gave Aaron the full hour of exercises even though her hands were shaking by the end. At 8:15, she heard Alexander's bedroom door open, immediately hid all the therapy equipment, scooped up both boys, and was casually playing peekaboo when he walked past the living room on his way to the kitchen. "Good morning, Mr. Harris," she'd said, smiling. He'd barely looked at her. "Morning." Grabbed his coffee, took a work call, left for the office 20 minutes later without asking about the twins. Watching it now, Alexander wanted to reach through the screen and shake himself. He clicked forward. Lunchtime. Maureen feeding Aaron with a special bottle he'd never noticed before. Different nipple, angled specifically to help with his oral motor control. It took 45 minutes to get 3 ounces into him. She never rushed, never showed frustration, just patient, constant, loving. Another clip. 3 p.m., Maureen on her phone, texting someone. Alexander zoomed in on the screen reflection in the window behind her. "Mama, I can't send money this month. I'm sorry. I had to buy equipment for the baby I'm caring for. He needs it more than we do right now. I'll send extra next month, I promise." The response came in Tagalog, but even without understanding the words, Alexander could read the tone. Her mother was upset. Maureen typed back, "I know, Mama, I know you're counting on me, but this little boy, if I don't help him, no one will. God will provide for us. Please trust me." She set the phone down, put her head in her hands. Alexander felt sick. She was supporting her family back home, sending money every month, and she'd stop so she could buy therapy equipment for his son. He scrolled faster through the timeline, looking for, he didn't know what. Something that would make sense of this, something that would explain why someone would give up everything for strangers. Then he found the footage from 3 days ago. Maureen in the kitchen after putting the twins down for the night, pulling something from her bag. A small photo in a frame, worn at the edges like it had been held 1,000 times. A little boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old, in a wheelchair. Smiling despite the way his body was twisted, his left hand curled tight against his chest. Maureen traced the photo with her finger, tears falling onto the glass. "I couldn't save you, Miguel," she whispered, "but I won't let it happen again. I won't." Alexander's vision blurred. She'd watched her brother die from the same condition Aaron had, and now she was watching history try to repeat itself. But this time, she had the knowledge, the skills, the chance to change the ending, even if it destroyed her in the process. Alexander clicked to the most recent footage, this morning, just hours ago. And what he saw made him realize he was already too late. This morning. 5:52 a.m. Maureen entering the penthouse even earlier than usual. She looked like she hadn't slept. Went straight to the nursery, but this time she didn't pick up the twins right away. She just stood there between their cribs, staring down at Aaron and Adrian sleeping peacefully, her hand covering her mouth. Then she pulled an envelope from her jacket pocket. The same government letter Alexander had seen her crying over weeks ago. She unfolded it, read it again like maybe the words had changed. They hadn't. Her lips moved, barely audible through the camera's microphone. 23 days left. She refolded the letter, put it away, and wiped her eyes. picked up Aaron, held him against her chest, and started singing that same lullaby, the one Alexander now knew she'd sung to her dying brother. Her voice cracked halfway through, but she kept going. "Your daddy's going to find out soon, sweet boy," she whispered into Aaron's hair. "And when he does, he's going to get you the help you need. Real doctors, real therapy, everything I can't give you." She kissed his head. "I won't be here to see you get better. But that's okay. That's okay because you will get better. You have to." Alexander's throat closed. She thought he was going to find out after she was gone. Thought she'd have to leave without ever telling him the truth, trusting that somehow her anonymous report would be enough. She had no idea he was watching this right now. The footage continued. Maureen doing the morning therapy session, but slower today. More careful. Like she was memorizing every moment, counting each stretch in whispered numbers, documenting Aaron's responses in her journal with extra detail. At 7:30, she pulled out her phone and opened that draft email again. The report to the medical board. Read through it one more time, her finger hovering over the send button. She didn't press it. Not yet. Still trying to buy more time. A few more days of therapy. A few more chances to help Aaron before she had to blow everything up. Alexander checked the timestamp on the current footage. This was from 6 hours ago, which meant Maureen was in the penthouse right now, down the hall, probably already awake, probably already starting her morning routine with the twins. She had no idea he'd spent the entire night watching 3 weeks of her secret life. No idea he knew about Miguel, about the deportation notice, about the equipment she'd bought with grocery money, about the report she was planning to send before she disappeared. No idea that everything she'd been hiding was about to come crashing down. Alexander closed the laptop, sat in the dark office, his heart pounding, mind racing through everything he'd just seen. He could hear movement down the hall now, Maureen's soft footsteps, the nursery door opening quietly. Her voice, gentle and warm, greeting the twins. He stood up, walked down the hallway on shaking legs, found her exactly where the cameras had shown her every morning, on the floor with Aaron, doing those careful exercises, singing softly. She looked up when she heard him in the doorway, saw his face, and froze. "How long have you known?" Alexander's voice came out rougher than he meant it to. He hadn't slept. Hadn't processed anything except 3 weeks of footage showing him a truth he'd been too blind to see. Maureen's hands froze mid-stretch on Aaron's left arm, her face drained of color. "Mr. Harris, She carefully set Aaron down on the mat, stood up slowly. "I don't understand what you—" "About Aaron's injury," his voice cracked. "About Dr. Sullivan. How long have you known?" The air left her lungs. She took a step back, hit the wall behind her. Her eyes darted to the twins, then back to Alexander, calculating escape routes that didn't exist. "I can explain." "How long?" Maureen's lips trembled. 6 weeks. Since the 2-month checkup when I saw his face. The way he looked when I mentioned the symptoms. Alexander's jaw clenched. 6 weeks you've been doing this. The therapy, the equipment, using your own money. I didn't know what else to do. Her voice broke. You weren't listening. The doctor wasn't listening. Aaron needed help and nobody was. Why didn't you tell me? The question hung between them like a blade. Maureen's eyes filled with tears. Because I'm illegal, Mr. Harris. The words came out barely above a whisper, but they hit Alexander like a physical blow. My visa expired 7 months ago. I couldn't afford to fix it. And the second I accuse a respected doctor of malpractice, the second I make myself visible to any official system, I get investigated. They check my status. I get deported. Her voice was shaking now. I knew you wouldn't believe me over him. I knew I had no credibility, no standing, no proof except what I learned taking care of my brother who died from the same thing. Alexander stared at her. Your brother. Miguel, fresh tears spilled over. He had cerebral palsy from a birth injury. We couldn't afford treatment in the Philippines. I watched him suffer for 8 years before he died. I was 14. She wiped her face with shaking hands. I recognized Aaron's symptoms immediately. The stiffness, the reflexes, the mark on his head from forceps trauma. I've seen this before, Mr. Harris. I know what happens when it goes untreated. So you just treated him yourself? In secret? What choice did I have? Her voice rose, desperate now. Stay silent and watch another child suffer, or speak up and get deported before I could help him at all. Alexander's mind was reeling. The deportation notice, I saw it on the footage. You have 23 days. Maureen's voice dropped to nothing. I was going to stay until the end, do as much therapy as possible, then send an anonymous report to the medical board before I left. At least then you'd know the truth. At least Aaron would get real help even if I wasn't here to see it. You were going to sacrifice everything. It wasn't a question. He's a baby, Mr. Harris, tears streaming freely now. An innocent baby who didn't ask for any of this, whose mother died giving him life, who deserves every chance to be okay. Her voice broke completely. I already failed to save one child. I couldn't fail again, even if it cost me everything, even if... She stopped mid-sentence, seeing something change in Alexander's face. What did you see? She whispered. On the cameras. What did you see? Alexander's hands were shaking. Everything, he said quietly. I saw everything. Maureen's knees nearly gave out, and in that moment, she understood. He knew about Miguel, about the therapy, about the money she'd spent, about the email she'd drafted and deleted 100 times, about every single thing she'd been hiding. She waited for him to tell her to leave, to call immigration, to fire her and protect himself from the liability. Instead, Alexander pulled out his phone, started dialing. Maureen's heart stopped. This was it. This was how it ended. But the name he spoke into the phone wasn't immigration. It was something she never expected. Get me David Rostov. I don't care what time it is, now. Maureen stood frozen against the wall, watching Alexander pace the nursery floor, phone pressed to his ear. David, it's Alexander Harris. I need an emergency immigration case handled today. Yes, today. I'm sponsoring a work visa. He glanced at Maureen. Full name? She could barely speak. Isabel Maureen Santos. Isabel Maureen Santos, Filipino national, expired student visa, currently undocumented. I need her legal status fixed immediately, whatever it costs. He paused, listening. I don't care if it's irregular. Make it happen. Bill me directly. He hung up, dialed again before Maureen could process what just happened. Dr. Benjamin Torres, this is Alexander Harris. My twin sons need an immediate evaluation for suspected birth trauma and cerebral palsy. Today, if possible. Pause. Yes, I know it's Saturday. I'll pay whatever premium you need. Both boys, full neurological workup. Another call. Sullivan's office. This is Alexander Harris. You can inform Dr. Sullivan he's fired effective immediately. Forward all medical records for Aaron and Adrian Harris to Dr. Benjamin Torres by end of business today. And tell him I'll be filing a formal complaint with the medical board on Monday morning. He ended the call. Made one more. Patricia, Diane, listen carefully. The custody suit is over. Withdraw the petition by Monday or I'll countersue for harassment and expose the financial motive behind your claim. Don't test me. He hung up, finally looked at Maureen. She was crying so hard she could barely stand. Mr. Harris, I can't. You saved my sons. His voice was raw. While I was planning to fire you, while I was looking for reasons to blame you for everything falling apart, you were saving them. I just did what anyone. No, Alexander cut her off. Not anyone. You spent your own money, your food money. You worked hours you weren't paid for. You risked everything. Your future, your dream of nursing school, your chance to stay in this country. For children who aren't yours. His voice cracked. You did what I should have been doing, what their father should have seen. Maureen shook her head. You were grieving. You lost your wife. You were trying to survive. I was drowning. Alexander's eyes were red, and I almost took them down with me. If you hadn't been here, he couldn't finish the sentence. Silence filled the nursery except for the twins' soft breathing. The lawyer I just called? Alexander said quietly. Best immigration attorney in Boston. He'll have your visa status fixed within a week. Full work authorization, legal residency. Maureen's legs gave out. She slid down the wall to the floor. I'm tripling your salary, Alexander continued. Full benefits. And I'm paying for nursing school. Full-time, not night classes. You'll work reduced hours here, but keep full pay so you can focus on your degree. Mr. Harris, that's too much. It's not enough. His voice broke completely. It'll never be enough for what you've done. Maureen covered her face with her hands, sobbing. But there's one more thing I need from you, Alexander said. She looked up, terrified. He got down on the floor beside her, right there on the nursery carpet where she'd spent hundreds of hours doing therapy in secret. Teach me, he whispered. Show me how to help them. Show me what you've been doing. I want to learn. I need to learn. Maureen stared at him through her tears. Please, Alexander said, let me be their father, the one they deserve, the one Emily believed I could be. For the first time in 6 weeks, Maureen wasn't carrying the weight alone. And for the first time since Emily died, Alexander wasn't running from the truth. But there was still one thing neither of them knew, something that would change everything again. Dr. Benjamin Torres arrived at the penthouse 3 hours later. He was in his 50s, calm presence, kind eyes, spent 20 minutes just watching Aaron and Adrian before he touched them. Then another hour doing the gentlest, most thorough examination Alexander had ever witnessed. Maureen stood in the corner, arms wrapped around herself, terrified. Finally, Dr. Torres sat back, looked at Alexander with an expression that was equal parts professional concern and quiet anger. Your son Aaron has mild hypertonic cerebral palsy, almost certainly from birth trauma. His voice was measured but firm. The torticollis, the left side stiffness, the exaggerated reflexes, these are classic presentations. Adrian shows some low muscle tone that needs monitoring, but Aaron's condition required intervention months ago. Alexander's stomach dropped. Months ago? At the 2-month checkup when concerns were first raised. Torres glanced at Maureen. Someone tried to get him help. Someone recognized the symptoms early when treatment is most effective. Dr. Sullivan said everything was normal. Dr. Sullivan was wrong, or lying. Torres pulled out a small flashlight, showed Alexander something on Aaron's scalp. This mark here? Forceps placement, and the bruising pattern suggests excessive force during delivery. This should have been documented immediately post-birth, should have triggered follow-up care. The room tilted. Someone injured my son during the C-section, Alexander said slowly, and then covered it up. That would be my assessment, yes. Torres's jaw was tight. I'll be filing my own report with the medical board. This is actionable malpractice. He turned to Maureen, his expression softening completely. You've been doing therapy with him, haven't you? She nodded, not trusting her voice. May I see your documentation? Maureen pulled out her journal with shaking hands. Pages and pages of detailed notes, exercises, timing, Aaron's responses, tiny improvements tracked with the precision of someone who'd done this before. Torres read through it, his eyebrows rising higher with each page. This is exceptional work, he said quietly. Professional-grade intervention. Where did you train? I didn't. Maureen's voice was barely audible. I cared for my brother. He had CP. I learned everything trying to help him. Torres looked at her for a long moment. You saved this child from permanent developmental delays. If these symptoms had gone untreated another 2 months, we'd be looking at irreversible damage. You gave him his future back. Maureen's knees buckled. Alexander caught her, held her steady. I want you on Aaron's care team, Torres said. Official capacity. I'll supervise, but you're clearly the expert on his specific case. You'll need to be certified, of course, but... She's enrolling in nursing school, Alexander said. Full-time. I'm covering tuition. Torres smiled. Good. The medical field needs people who care like this. He stood, packed his equipment. I'll send over a formal treatment plan by Monday. Aaron will need ongoing therapy, but the prognosis is excellent thanks to early intervention. He paused at the door. Mr. Harris, the person who did this to your son, who injured him and then covered it up? His voice went cold. Make sure he faces consequences. Children like Aaron deserve justice. After Torres left, Alexander and Maureen sat on the nursery floor, Aaron between them, Adrian sleeping peacefully in his crib. "Show me," Alexander said softly. "Show me the first exercise." Maureen's hands were still shaking, but she picked up Aaron gently, demonstrated the careful stretch of his left arm, the precise angle, the counting rhythm. "Like this. 10 reps 3 times a day. You have to be patient. It takes time." Alexander watched, memorized every movement. "Can I try?" She handed Aaron to him, guided his hands to the right position. "Gentle, just like that. Count with me." They counted together, 1 through 10, Alexander's voice breaking halfway through because he was finally doing something that mattered for his son. "Good," Maureen whispered. "That's perfect." They worked together for an hour, Maureen teaching, Alexander learning. Both of them focused entirely on this tiny human who needed them both. When Aaron finally fell asleep, exhausted from the therapy, Alexander looked at Maureen. "Thank you," he said, "for not giving up on them. For not giving up even when I gave you every reason to." Maureen wiped her eyes. "They're worth it. Every sacrifice, every risk, they're worth everything." "I know," Alexander said. "I'm just sorry it took me so long to see it." 3 weeks later, something happened that changed everything one final time. Something that proved God's timing is always perfect, even when we can't see it. 3 months later, Alexander left work at 5 p.m. sharp. It was a Tuesday. His board members had stopped questioning it. The company ran fine without him micromanaging every decision. Turned out the world didn't end when he chose his sons over conference calls. He walked into the penthouse and heard laughter coming from the living room. Maureen was on the floor with both boys, now 7 months old. She looked different, less exhausted, more herself. The weight of secrets no longer pulling her down. Her visa had come through 2 weeks after that morning in the nursery. She was enrolled at Boston College School of Nursing, attending classes 3 days a week while still working reduced hours with the twins. "How'd they do today?" Alexander asked, setting down his briefcase, something he used to bring home and ignore. Now he actually left work at work. Aaron rolled from back to tummy, both sides. Maureen's smile was radiant. 3 times. Alexander's throat tightened. 3 months ago, Aaron couldn't roll at all. His left side too stiff, his muscles too tight. Now he was moving like any other baby. "Dr. Torres came by for the weekly check," Maureen continued. "He said Aaron's progress is exceeding every projection. The torticollis is almost completely resolved." Alexander got down on the floor beside them. Adrian immediately crawled into his lap, something that still made Alexander's chest ache with gratitude. His sons knew him now, trusted him, wanted him. He picked up Aaron, did the stretching exercises that had become as natural as breathing, counted in rhythm with Maureen, their voices overlapping like a song they'd practiced 1,000 times. The medical board had suspended Dr. Sullivan's license pending investigation. Criminal charges were likely. Alexander had made sure of that, not out of vengeance, but because other children deserved protection. Diane had withdrawn the custody suit without a fight once she realized Alexander had documentation of her financial motives. She hadn't contacted him since, and every night before bed, Alexander sat in the nursery and talked to Emily's picture on the wall, told her about the boys' day, about Maureen's nursing school classes, about the small victories that felt like miracles. "You'd be so proud of them," he'd whisper, "and you were right about something. God does provide. Even when we can't see it, even when we're too broken to recognize help standing right in front of us." Now, watching Aaron laugh as Maureen tickled his feet, Alexander felt something he hadn't felt since Emily died. Hope. "Mr. Harris, look." Maureen's voice pulled him back. She was holding a toy just out of Aaron's reach. Aaron was staring at it, concentrating. Then, slowly, deliberately, he reached out with both hands, left and right. Working together? The toy wasn't the point. The reaching was. Both hands, equal strength, perfect coordination. Maureen's eyes filled with tears. He did it. He actually did it. Alexander couldn't speak, could barely breathe. Aaron grabbed the toy with both hands and brought it to his mouth, completely unaware that he'd just proven every doctor wrong, validated every sacrifice Maureen had made, justified every sleepless night and terrified prayer. "Miguel would be so proud of you," Maureen whispered, one hand on Aaron's head. So proud. Alexander understood then what he'd been too blind to see before. God hadn't taken Emily away as punishment. He'd sent Maureen as grace, a young woman who'd lost her brother, carrying that grief across an ocean, working jobs that barely paid rent, fighting to stay in a country that didn't want her, all so she'd be exactly where she needed to be the moment Alexander's sons needed her most. "Thank you," Alexander said, his voice breaking, "for everything. For seeing them when I couldn't. For staying when you had every reason to run. For loving them like they're mine," Maureen finished softly. "Because they are. Maybe not by blood, but by choice, by love, by every hour I spent believing they deserved a future." Alexander pulled both boys close, Maureen's hand resting on his shoulder. They sat there on the floor, this family that grief and grace had built together, and watched Aaron play with both hands. Equal, strong, whole. Outside, the sun was setting over San Diego. Inside, 3 people who'd all lost someone they loved had found something they didn't know they needed. Each other. And a second chance to get it right. Sometimes the people who save us aren't the ones we expect. Sometimes God sends help in forms we almost miss. Quiet, unnoticed, sacrificing everything while we're too broken to see. This story is for every caregiver working in silence, every immigrant fighting to stay, every person choosing love over self-preservation. You're seen. You matter. And your sacrifice changes lives in ways you'll never fully know.